Every hoofbeat made her heart race. Every silence broke it. 3 weeks, and Clara feared she was already a widow.
Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories. Turn on the bell icon so you can do not miss any new video.
The autumn wind carried a bitter chill across the Montana plains as Clara Mae Thompson stood on the weathered porch of their modest ranch house, her eyes fixed on the distant ridge where the trail disappeared into shadow. 3 weeks. Thomas had been gone 3 weeks now, and he had promised to return in 10 days at most. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, the worn wool offering little comfort against the cold that had settled deep into her bones. It was not merely the October air that chilled her. It was the silence, the absence, the empty space beside her in their bed each night that seemed to grow larger with every passing hour. Behind her, the door creaked open, and she felt a small hand slip into hers. Sarah, their 7-year-old daughter, pressed her face against her mother's hip, her dark braids falling across Clara's arm. "Is Papa coming home today?" the child asked, the same question she had asked every morning for 11 days now. Clara swallowed hard against the tightness in her throat. "I hope so, darling. I surely hope so." But hope was becoming harder to hold on to with each sunset that painted the sky in shades of blood and fire. Thomas had ridden to Helena to sell their cattle and secure supplies for the coming winter. It was a journey he had made a dozen times before. He knew the trails better than he knew the lines on his own weathered hands. Something had gone wrong. Clara could feel it in her marrow, in the way her heart stuttered each time she heard hoofbeats on the wind that turned out to be nothing more than her desperate imagination. Young William, their 12-year-old son, had taken over his father's chores without complaint, rising before dawn to tend to the horses and the remaining cattle. He had grown 3 inches over the summer, his shoulders broadening, his jaw setting in. That same stubborn line his father wore when facing trouble. But Clara had heard him crying in the barn 2 nights ago, his sobs muffled against the neck of his father's favorite mare, and her heart had shattered into pieces she was not certain could ever be mended. The ranch hands had offered to ride out searching, but Clara had refused at first, needing them to maintain the property, to keep the wolves at bay, both the 4-legged kind and the predators who circled like vultures whenever they sensed weakness. But yesterday, she had sent old Miguel toward Helena, her voice breaking as she pressed the last of their emergency money into his calloused palm and begged him to find her husband, alive or otherwise. She needed to know. The not knowing was destroying her more surely than any true ever could. That night, Clara sat by the fire, Sarah sleeping fitfully with her head in her mother's lap while William pretended to read a book he had not turned a page of in over an hour. The flames cast dancing shadows across the rough-hewn walls, illuminating the photograph that hung above the mantel. Their wedding day, 15 years past, when Thomas had looked at her like she was the sunner. Eyes after an endless night, and she had believed with all her heart that nothing in this world could ever separate them. She had been just 17 when she married him, a rancher 10 years her senior with kind eyes and gentle hands that belied the strength in his broad shoulders. Her father had objected, calling Thomas a dreamer, a man with more ambition than sense. But Clara had seen something in him that her father could not. She had seen a man who would build a life with her, not for her, who would treat her as a partner rather than a possession. And he had, through drought and flood, through the loss of their firstborn son who had lived only 3 days, through lean winters when they had eaten nothing but beans and hope, Thomas had stood beside her. He had held her when she wept and celebrated with her when joy came calling. He had loved her with a constancy that never wavered, even when the years carved lines into both their faces, and silver began to thread through her once dark hair. "Mama," William said softly, finally setting aside the neglected book, "what if Papa never comes back?" The question hung in the air like a physical weight, pressing down on Clara's chest. Ill, she could scarcely breathe. She had asked herself that same question 100 times in the dark hours of the night. What would she do? How would she manage the ranch alone? How would she explain to her children that the man who had taught them to ride, who had carried them on his shoulders through fields of wildflowers, who had sung them to sleep with old cowboy songs, was never coming home? "Your father is the strongest man I have ever known," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He has survived blizzards and stampedes, and a fever that nearly took him when you were just a baby. Whatever has delayed him, he will find his way back to us. He always does." William nodded, wanting desperately to believe her, and Clara wished she possessed the same faith in her own words. The next tea morning dawned gray and heavy with the promise of early snow. Clara moved through her chores mechanically, feeding the chickens, kneading bread, mending the tear in William's only good shirt, but her eyes kept drifting to the window, to the ribbon of road that wound through the valley toward distant mountains. It was just past noon when Sarah came running from the yard, her face flushed, her bar, "Eth coming," in ragged gasps. "Mama, Ryder's coming." Clara's heart seized in her chest. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the pale autumn sun. Two figures on horseback, still too far away to identify. One of them slumped forward in the saddle, held upright by what appeared to be rope. Her knees threatened to buckle beneath her. "Die, our God in heaven, let him be alive." The minutes that passed as the riders approached felt like hours, each hoofbeat against the frozen ground marking time with agonizing slowness. William came to stand beside her, his young face pale and set, his hand gripping hers with a strength that surprised her. As the riders drew closer, Clara recognized old Miguel on the lead horse, his weathered face grave. And behind him, tied to the saddle to keep from falling, was Thomas. She was running before she knew she had moved, her skirts gathered in her fists, her feet pounding against the hard earth. Thomas lifted his head at the sound of her approach, and even at a distance, she could see the dark bruise that covered half his face, the way his left arm hung limply at his side, the blood that stained. His torn shirt. "Clara." His voice was hoarse, barely more than a whisper, but it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Miguel reined in his horse and quickly dismounted, moving to help Thomas down from the saddle. Clara reached them just as Thomas's feet touched the ground, and she caught him as his legs gave way, easing him down to sit on the cold earth while she knelt beside him. Her hands cupping his battered face. "You fool," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You stubborn, impossible fool. What happened to you?" Thomas managed a weak smile, his good hand coming up to cover hers. "Ran into some trouble on the way back. 3 men ambushed me about 2 days out from Helena. Took the money from the cattle sale, took my horse, left me for dead in a ravine." Clara's blood ran cold at the thought of him lying broken and alone in some godforsaken ditch while she had waited helplessly at home, not knowing. "How did you survive?" "Couldn't die," he said simply, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart ache. "Kept thinking about you, about the children. Every time I wanted to close my eyes and let go, I saw your face, heard your voice telling me to get up. So I got up, walked for 3 days until I found a homestead. Good folks there patched me up best they could, but I was too weak to travel. That's where Miguel found me." She pressed her forehead against his, her tears mingling with the dust and dried blood on his skin. "I thought I had lost you. I thought I would never see you again." "You will never lose me," Thomas said, his voice fierce despite his weakness. "Not as long as there is breath in my body, Clara May. I made you a promise 15 years ago, and I intend to keep it until God himself calls me home. William and Sarah had reached them by then, and both children threw themselves at their father, careful of his injuries, but desperate to touch him, to prove to themselves that he was real and alive and home. Thomas gathered them as best he could with one good arm, pressing kisses to the tops of their heads, murmuring words of comfort and apology for frightening them. Miguel helped Clara get Thomas into the house and settled in bed. The old man explained that Thomas had indeed broken his arm and cracked several ribs, but the family who had sheltered him had set the arm properly, and Miguel believed he would heal fully with rest and care. Stubborn as a mule, that one, Miguel said with gruff affection, nodding toward the bedroom. Wanted to ride home himself, even though he could barely sit upright. I had to tie him to the saddle to keep him from falling. Thank you, Clara said, grasping the old man's hands. Thank you for bringing him back to me. Miguel's weathered face softened. That man love. Es you something fierce, Senora. All he talked about on the ride home was getting back to you, seeing your face, holding you again. A love like that deserves to find its way home. After Miguel left to rest in the bunkhouse, Clara sent the children to do their evening chores with promises that they could visit with their father later. Then she slipped into the bedroom and closed the door behind wanting nothing more than to be alone with her husband. Thomas was propped up against pillows, his broken arm bound tightly to his chest, his face a mask of bruises and cuts that would take weeks to fade. But his eyes, those warm brown eyes that had first captured her heart at a church social so many years ago, were fixed on her with an expression of such profound love that it stole her breath. She crossed to the bed and sat beside him, taking his good hand in both of hers. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, words unnecessary after so many years of shared life and love. I was so afraid, Clara finally whispered. Every day that passed, I died a little more inside. I could not imagine this world without you in it, could not imagine waking up alone every morning, go to sleep alone every night. You are my whole heart, Thomas. You always have been. Thomas squeezed her hand weakly. When I was lying in that ravine, broken and bleeding, I thought about all the things I should have told you more often. How beautiful you are, even more beautiful now than the day I married you. How your laugh is my favorite sound in all creation. How every morning when I wake up and see you beside me, I thank God for giving me a life so blessed. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks again. You have told me those things, in 1,000 different ways every single day. Not enough, he insisted. Never enough. I thought I was going to die without ever saying goodbye, without holding you one more time. It was the worst torment I have ever known. She leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his, tasting salt and grime, and the essence of the man she loved more than life itself. He responded with as much strength as he could muster, his hand coming up to tangle in her hair, holding her close as if he never intended to let go. When they finally drew apart, Clara rested her head carefully against his shoulder, mindful of his injuries. Promise me you will never leave me like that again. I do not care about money or supplies or anything else. I only care about you, about us. I promise, Thomas said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. No more long journeys alone. From now on, where I go, you go. Where you stay, I stay. I refuse to spend another night on this earth that you are not by my side. Clara closed her eyes, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear, a rhythm that had almost been silenced forever. Outside she could hear the wind picking up, hear the first snowflakes beginning to tap against the window. Winter was coming, harsh and unforgiving, but it did not frighten her. Nothing could frighten her now that Thomas was home. In the weeks that followed, Clara rarely left Thomas's side. She fed him broth and changed his bandages, read to him from the old books they kept on the shelf, played cards with him until his competitive spirit returned and he accused her of cheating. The children spent every spare moment in their father's room, William reading aloud from adventure nov. Els, Sarah performing elaborate plays with her ragdolls for his amusement. Slowly Thomas healed. The bruises faded from purple to green to yellow, then disappeared altogether. His arm mended, though it would always ache in cold weather. His ribs knitted back together, allowing him to take deeper breaths, to laugh without wincing. And one December evening, 3 days before Christmas, he finally felt strong enough to leave his bed and join his family by the fire. Clara sat beside him on the worn settee, her head resting on his shoulder, watching their children play a game of checkers on the floor. The fire crackled warmly, casting a golden glow across the room, and outside the windows, snow fell gently on a world at peace. "I have a gift for you," Thomas said quietly, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet pouch. "I bought it in Helena before the ambush. Managed to hide it in my boot so those thieves did not find it." Clara opened the pouch and gasped softly. Inside was a delicate gold locket, engraved with wildflowers, a tiny sapphire set in its center, the same color as her eyes. "I know it is not practical," Thomas said, suddenly self-conscious. "I know we needed that money for supplies, but I saw it in a shop window, and I thought about how you never ask for anything for yourself, how you sacrifice everything for this family. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that tells the world how precious you are." Clara's vision blurred with tears as she turned the locket over in her hands. On the back, engraved in Thomas's own reeful script, were the words she had spoken to him on their wedding day. "My heart is forever yours." "It is perfect," she whispered. "You are perfect." Thomas clasped the locket around her neck, his fingers lingering on the warm skin at her nape. "Merry Christmas, my love." Clara turned and kissed him deeply, pouring into that kiss all the fear and relief and overwhelming gratitude she had felt since the day he came home to her. When they parted, Thomas was smiling, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Merry Christmas," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for coming back to me, always," he promised. "I will always come back to you." And watching the firelight play across his beloved face, Clara believed him with all her heart. Whatever storms the future might bring, whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together. Because that was what love meant. That was what Thomas had taught her. Not just the easy moments, not just the joy, but the struggle, the fight, the refusal to give up on each other, no matter how dark the night might grow. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in white, transforming the harsh Montana landscape into something soft and magical. Inside, safe and warm and whole, the Thompson family held each other close and gave thanks for the greatest gift of all. Another day together, another chance to love,